Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the gaslit streets of Paris. The kind of streets where every cobblestone feels like it remembers more than you do, and the air smells faintly of roasted chestnuts, spilled wine, and rain-soaked stone. You can almost hear the soft shuffle of soldiers' boots, but the war is over now. Or at least people keep insisting it is. Paris in the early 1920s is a city stitched together with laughter and scars, a patchwork quilt where grief still peeks through the seams. You probably won't survive this if you try to make sense of it all. Too much champagne, too many secrets, and too many late nights under a flickering street lamp. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the little constellation of where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the Boulevard Saint-Germain, noticing how every cafe is both awake and asleep at the same time. Men in uniforms lean against doorframes. Women with bobbed hair and bright scarves smoke with a practiced elegance. A gramophone hums from somewhere unseen. This is a city still recovering from the Great War, still trying to pretend the horror of trenches and mustard gas was just some bad dream, though the faces of veterans with missing limbs and blank eyes make it impossible to forget. Strange, isn't it? You're surrounded by celebration dances, parades just pouring from cellar bars, yet you feel a ghost at your elbow at every turn. Historians still argue whether Paris in these years was truly joyful or just expertly masking its grief, dressing wounds with sequins and laughter. Maybe it doesn't matter. What you know for sure is that there's a strange hunger in the city, a hunger for distraction, for forgetting, for something stronger than champagne. You pause by the Seine, the water sliding black and silver under the bridges, and you picture the city as a body. The boulevards as veins, the cafes as beating hearts, and all of it needing some new pulse to keep it moving forward. And in that gap between pain and desire, that's where heroin begins to whisper. It doesn't scream yet, not in 1920, not here, not now. Instead, it's the quiet offering of a pharmacist's back room, the gentle suggestion of a doctor who swears it will soothe your nerves, or the careless powder in the pocket of a party guest who seems to know more than you. You wouldn't call it a craze yet, more like a murmur, an echo bouncing off the stone walls of Paris. But you sense it as sure as the gaslights hum. Of course, heroin hadn't always worn this glamorous mask. Just a decade earlier, it was Bayer's wonder drug, the same company that sold aspirin, promoted as a cough remedy and pain reliever. No shady alleyway dealings, no underground jazz club trades. Just a neat brown bottle, a respectable label, and instructions that made it sound like something your grandmother might keep in her cabinet. That's the part people forget. The craze didn't start dirty, it started clinical. You glance at a cafe window where two young men laugh too loudly, wine glasses clinking, and you remember the numbers. By 1919, Paris had tens of thousands of veterans living with wounds that no bandage could heal. Pain in their bodies, yes, but also pain behind their eyes. Doctors, desperate and overworked, had reached for whatever worked. And heroin, it worked at first. It dulled pain, it softened memories, it quieted the nights. The city, you realize, is like a sponge at this moment, soaking up anything that promises relief. And while it drinks in jazz and modern art and a new kind of daring fashion, it also absorbs this tiny white powder that will soon leave stains too deep to scrub out. What's curious is how quietly it begins. You don't yet see the wild headlines or the panicked politicians. Instead, you feel a low hum like the faint buzzing of a bee somewhere nearby. It's subtle. A wounded soldier here, a coughing child there, a tired nurse whose hands won't stop shaking. Each one takes a little measure, and each one tells themselves it's nothing, just medicine, just temporary. And yet, you know where it's heading. You're walking these streets with hindsight, with the knowledge that the city is on the edge of a wave it doesn't see coming. That's what makes it eerie, the calm before the storm, the sweetness before the teeth. You lean against a lamppost, the iron cold against your back, and you think of one of those fringe tidbits that's almost too strange to be real. There were pamphlets, you recall, printed in the late 1910s, where heroin was actually suggested as a cure for children's colds. Imagine that, parents rubbing their tired eyes, dousing their feverish kids with a miracle powder, while never suspecting they were setting the stage for something that would haunt the next decade. Paris doesn't know it yet, but you do. Heroin isn't just going to stay in the hospitals or in the polite prescriptions. It's going to seep out into the streets, into the clubs, into the very idea of Paris itself. The city of light is about to become the city of sleepless nights, and every cobblestone beneath your feet feels like it's waiting for that secret to arrive. You keep walking past the Louvre's silent bulk, past the crowded bistros where the clatter of plates competes with laughter, and you feel it. Paris after the Great War is a city desperate to forget, desperate to heal, desperate to believe. And Heroin, patient and silent, is already waiting to answer. You keep walking, your shoes scuffing along the cobblestones, and the air grows thicker as you drift toward the cafes of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. The lamps blur with the smoke curling out of doorways, and the laughter of young people spills into the night like wine from an overfilled glass. You notice something subtle here, something beginning to pulse beneath the surface. It's not champagne, though, that still flows. It's not absinthe, though green bottles clink everywhere. It's a new whisper, softer than jazz and sweeter than sugar. Heroin. At first, it doesn't sound shocking. You might even shrug. Medicine, right? You remember Bayer's label, that neat little brown bottle that promised to soothe a cough or calm aching joints. It was even marketed as less addictive than morphine. Imagine the irony. The very substance promoted as safe was about to become the city's most dangerous temptation. Historians still argue whether Bayer's advertising was truly naive or deliberately sly. But either way, the powder had already slipped into Parisian veins before most people knew its name. Doctors began it, of course. You picture them in long white coats, stethoscopes dangling, scribbling prescriptions with the briskness of men too busy to second guess. Soldiers returned from the trenches with nightmares that no sedative could silence. Wives and mothers suffered grief so heavy their bodies trembled. Pharmacists filled the orders with a polite nod, never mentioning the growing unease among some researchers. You hear the faint clink of a vial sliding across a wooden counter. Just a bit of relief, monsieur. Just a little quiet for your mind, madame. But Paris doesn't leave anything in the shadows for long. You push open the heavy door of a smoky cafe and the scene swallows you whole. Velvet drapes sag at the corners, waiters balance trays like jugglers, and at the center of the room sits a crowd of bohemians, painters, students, would-be philosophers, all with wide eyes and restless hands. One of them sprinkles something delicate into his wine, stirs, and drinks with an exaggerated flourish. Another leans back in her chair, eyelids drooping, a serene smile spreading as if the world itself has been muted. The craze is born not in hospitals but in spaces like this. Word of mouth spreads faster than any newspaper. It makes you feel lighter, calmer, untouchable. No hangover, no ugly bitterness, just soft waves carrying you away. You sense it moving from table to table, from artist loft to dance floor, like a secret everyone wants to keep yet everyone also wants to share. You notice the city itself almost encouraging this. Remember how Paris after the war felt like a sponge? Now it's soaking heroin the way it soaks music and art. The avant-garde loves anything new, daring, slightly dangerous. Heroin slides into that slot like a missing puzzle piece. In the smoky rooms of Montparnasse, where poets scribble furious lines and painters slash canvases with wild colors, the powder becomes another medium of expression. You don't just write about despair, you inhale it, you inject it, you become it. And yet, it's not scandalous, not yet. The newspapers still praise heroin as modern medicine. Pharmacists stock it openly. Some families even keep small jars at home, the way you might keep aspirin in your kitchen drawer. There's something unsettling in that, this creeping presence dressed in the costume of respectability. Here's a quirky little detail for you. Some Parisian etiquette guides from the early 1920s actually warned women not to mention their nervous powder at social dinners, not because it was immoral, but because it was considered too personal, like talking about underwear at the table. Imagine that, heroin treated as a polite secret, a minor faux pas but nothing more. You step back out into the street, the air cool against your face after the suffocating cafe smoke. The moonlight glitters on the Seine and you realize what you're witnessing is a transition. Heroin is no longer just a medical solution, nor yet the notorious vice it will become. It's in that in-between space, half clinical, half cosmopolitan, tiptoeing toward the edge of the spotlight. In Paris, already bruised and buzzing, is the perfect stage. You drift further down the boulevard, past glowing windows where pharmacists are still busy at midnight. The glass jars stacked neatly on their shelves gleam like tiny stars, each one filled with powders and tinctures promising relief. And there, behind the counter, a man in a spotless white coat adjusts his spectacles, looking every bit the picture of trust. But you know what's hiding in some of those drawers. Heroin tucked in with cough syrups, nerve tonics, and sedatives. It's almost funny. Paris in the early 1920s is a place where the doctor, the dealer, and the denier are often the same person. You walk through the heavy oak door of a clinic and hear the scratch of pens across prescription pads. A soldier with phantom pain limps out, a mother with hollow eyes walks in. Each one leaves with a little glass vial, an amber bottle, or a folded paper packet. All official, all stamped with authority, yet each one also carrying the possibility of dependency. You pause to consider how fine that line really is. Doctors know morphine is addictive, everyone knows that by now. But heroin? Oh, that was supposed to be different. Less habit-forming, more effective, cleaner. Bayer had sworn it after all. Historians still argue whether the medical community truly believed this or whether some simply looked the other way because the results were too convenient. A quiet patient is easier than a restless one after all. And where the doctors hesitated, the dealers stepped in with enthusiasm. You catch a glimpse of a dim back room in Montmartre, curtains drawn tight, where a man with slick back hair measures tiny parcels on a brass scale. He calls it medicine too, though his customers rarely need prescriptions. His clients aren't coughing children or wounded veterans anymore, they're dancers, cabaret singers, and restless students. All of them want the same thing, a quick escape, no questions asked. It's a strange circle you're watching unfold. The pharmacists point to the doctors point to the scientists, and the dealers simply shrug as if to say, if they don't stop me, why should I stop myself? Deniability spreads like smoke in the air. Everyone knows, but no one really knows, or maybe they all pretend not to. There's even a quirky tidbit about one Parisian doctor who supposedly kept a silver-plated syringe in his office, not to treat patients, but to demonstrate the sophistication of modern medicine during dinner parties. Guests would laugh, sip their wine, and marvel at how advanced healthcare had become. None of them asked what exactly went into the syringe. You lean against the doorway, listening to the shuffle of footsteps in and out of that clinic, the quiet jingling of coins exchanged in back alleys, the nervous giggle of a girl holding a paper packet she claims is just for her nerves. You realize what makes this period so strange. Heroin is moving freely across social boundaries. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, soldier or starlet, patient or poet. Somewhere along the line, the same powder is touching all their lives. And yet, the deniability holds. Paris tells itself it's under control. Doctors insist it's medicinal. Dealers insist it's harmless. Politicians insist it's not really a problem. And the city, already addicted to distraction, happily nods along. You step back into the night air, pulling your coat tighter, and you feel it again. That hum beneath the laughter, that quiet tension. The craze hasn't yet erupted, but its roots are tangled in the very institutions meant to protect the people. When the lines between healer and hustler blur, how long before the whole city slips, you head uphill toward Montmartre, where the streets narrow into winding ribbons and the air feels permanently thick with smoke, perfume, and laughter. The cafes spill music into the alleys. And every corner seems to hum with an experiment, whether it's paint on canvas, fingers on piano keys, or powders on the tongue. You've stepped into the playground where medicine is melting into lifestyle, where heroin stops pretending to be discreet and begins to flirt openly with Parisian nightlife. The cabarets are your first stop. You slip through velvet curtains into a haze of cigarette smoke and sequined dresses. A woman with a voice like velvet croons from the stage, her eyes half shut, while waiters weave between crowded tables balancing trays of champagne and something less official. Powder in a folded paper packet, passed hand to hand under the table, exchanged with the same casualness as a cigarette. You notice how quickly the smiles soften, how the eyes glaze into a distant calm. It doesn't look scandalous, it looks almost fashionable. Then as dawn breaks, you wander down into Montparnasse, where the scene changes but the powder remains. Here in the damp basements and cluttered studios, the intellectuals hold court. Writers scrawl furious lines on cafe napkins, artists smear paint until the colors drip like dreams, philosophers lean back with dark circles under their eyes, muttering about meaning. And somewhere among the arguments and ashtrays, someone opens a small box. The ritual is quiet, reverent even, as if heroin is no longer a drug but a muse. Historians still argue whether heroin truly fueled the creativity of this crowd or whether it simply dulled their pain long enough to keep them producing. Maybe both. You watch a young painter sway in front of his canvas, brush dripping, muttering that he's found clarity. The lines on his painting blur, his hands tremble, but his eyes shine. In his mind, the powder is part of the art. There's a quirky detail you can't help but notice. Some cafes even advertise themselves as friendly to the tired nerves crowd. A wink and nod code that everyone understood. You could order coffee, wine, or a quiet moment in the back room that promised far more than caffeine. Imagine sitting at a table beside a poet, a saxophonist, and a painter, all half bent over their cups, all sharing the same glazed stillness. Not exactly a lively debate, but in its own way a performance of silence. Montmartre at night, Montparnasse by day. It's like the city has two faces, both wearing the same secret smile. The powder links them together, crossing boundaries of class, culture, and art. You walk between the two worlds, noticing how the bohemian ideal, freedom, rebellion, escape, aligns perfectly with the drug's promise. Paris is already high on the idea of being modern, daring, shocking. Heroin just happens to offer that daring in a tiny white packet. But under the laughter, under the music, there's that same hum you felt before, a soft warning, a vibration in the cobblestones. Everyone here is playing, experimenting, pushing limits, and everyone insists they're in control. But the cabarets and cafes are filling with smoke so thick you wonder how long anyone can breathe. You follow the beat before you even know where it's coming from. A low thump of drums, a skitter of piano keys, and a saxophone sliding like honey through the air. Paris has opened its doors to jazz, and you're pulled into the rhythm as if the sidewalks themselves are tapping their feet. The clubs are crowded, hot, and restless, filled with dancers who seem to forget the hour, the day, even their own exhaustion. And right there, mixed with the music, you find heroin slipping into the scene like another instrument in the band. It starts with the musicians. Many of them are expats, men and women who crossed the Atlantic looking for freedom, freedom from racism in America, freedom to play louder, faster, stranger. Their nights are long, their energy endless, their nerves frayed. A powder that softens the body and quiets the mind finds its way into their circles easily. You picture a trumpeter, sweat glistening under the stage lights, ducking backstage between sets to lean against the wall, a glassy calm washing over him before he steps back into the spotlight. The crowd notices, even if they don't admit it. The music stretches, bends, grows dreamier as though every note is swaying underwater. Some nights it's mesmerizing, other nights it collapses into chaos. Historians still argue whether heroin added to the magic of early Parisian jazz or slowly corroded it from within. Either way, the link becomes inseparable in the city's imagination: jazz and heroin, sound and silence, energy and escape. You sit at a table near the stage, your foot tapping without meaning to. A dancer spins past you, skirts flaring, laughter sharp, and then she leans against the wall with that same half-smile you've been seeing everywhere. Someone hands her a small, folded packet. She tucks it into her purse like a secret note from a lover. This is no hospital cure, no whispered remedy for nerves. This is fashion now, part of the rhythm of the night. And here's one of those odd little tidbits. Some Paris clubs began calling heroin Le Blanc Silencia, the silent white, a phrase that made it sound more like a mysterious band member than a chemical. Imagine slipping into a basement bar, ordering a drink, and hearing the regulars gossip about who's playing tonight. Oh, the saxophonist, the drummer, and of course, Le Blanc Silencia. You watch the dancers whirl faster, the band stretch the song longer, the night push past dawn. The powder doesn't replace the champagne or the cigarettes. It weaves around them, enhancing, mooting, twisting the experience into something new. The city is alive with rhythm, but beneath the pulse of the drums, there's the quieter pulse of veins carrying the same white powder through hundreds of bodies. By the time you step outside, the sun is pale against the rooftops, and you can still hear the echo of the music bouncing in your chest. Paris has embraced jazz like a heartbeat, and heroin has slipped into that embrace so seamlessly you can't tell where the music ends and the silence begins. You drift south again, past the Seine, into the smoky cafes of Montparnasse where the so-called lost generation gathers. You can feel their disillusion before you even sit down. They're the ones who crossed the ocean or the battlefield, who looked into the wreckage of the war and found nothing waiting for them back home. Writers, painters, drifters, dreamers, they're all here, restless, nursing black coffee, scribbling on napkins, staring too long into the bottom of wine glasses. And now some of them are stirring something stronger into their cups. You slide into a chair at the edge of the crowd, listening to their arguments. The talk spins between art and philosophy, politics and despair. One insists the world is meaningless, another insists it's absurd, another just shrugs and lights another cigarette. And in the pauses, those long, heavy pauses where words run out, heroin begins to creep in like a substitute for faith. A packet passed quietly across the table, a syringe gleaming in the candlelight, a silence settling, heavy but soft. Historians still argue whether heroin really shaped the works of these expatriates, or whether it was simply another backdrop to their endless dissatisfaction. Did the drug sharpen their insight or just numb the ache of futility? No one can agree. What you can see, though, is how easily it fits into their lives. They've already abandoned conventions, traditional careers, traditional families, traditional nations. Why not abandon sobriety too? You watch a writer you almost recognize, tall, slouched, with tired eyes, scribbling furiously in a notebook. He mutters about truth, about nothingness, about the pointlessness of language. His hand shakes, his pen scratches, and you notice a small vial on the table beside him. He's not ashamed, he's not hiding it. For him, it's just part of the toolkit alongside ink and paper. A quirky tidbit floats to you through the haze. Some cafes kept little comfort boxes tucked under tables for their regulars, small tins where you could stash your powder or syringe between visits, as casually as you might leave a coat on a rack. Imagine that, checking your poison at the door, then picking it up again on your way out. The lost generation wasn't only lost in philosophy, they were lost in practice too. Heroin offered them what their pens and brushes could not. An immediate shift, a chemical escape hatch from the weight of existence. And the city, with its tolerance for eccentricity and its hunger for novelty, let them indulge without too many questions. You leave the cafe as dawn seeps into the streets, your ears still ringing with their half-finished arguments. They think they're rebelling, inventing new ways of living. But as you walk away, you can't help but sense how fragile it all is. They're not just lost in art, they're lost in the haze that follows them out the door. You wander now into the glittering avenues where the shop windows gleam with silk, perfume, and gold. This isn't Montmartre's smoky rebellion or Montparnasse's intellectual despair. This is the world of polished shoes, shimmering gowns, and headlines that call women modern simply because they cut their hair short. The flapper image has arrived in Paris, and with it, a strange new marriage, glamour arm-in-arm with the needle. You pause outside a fashion house, mannequins frozen in daring dresses that scandalize the old guard. Inside, models glide down hallways draped in sequins that shimmer like champagne. They are thin, sharp, effortlessly chic, and you notice how some of them move with a dreamy slowness as though floating just slightly outside of themselves. Heroin doesn't just haunt the cafes anymore. It has slipped behind the velvet curtains of fashion shows, into the handbags of the stylish, into the dressing rooms where nerves must be calmed before the spotlight. It isn't whispered shamefully here. Among certain circles, it's spoken of as almost a beauty secret, another tool in the arsenal of glamour. A woman in a feathered headband leans across a cocktail bar and sighs that the powder helps her stay slim. A young actor explains to his friends that it keeps his confidence steady, his voice smooth, his nerves from trembling. It's become part of the costume, hidden beneath the rouge and satin gloves. Historians still argue whether this was truly widespread or exaggerated by scandal-hungry journalists. But you know how rumors work in a city like Paris. Once whispered, they travel faster than any taxi on the Champs-Élysées. And soon, the idea of heroin as fashionable becomes almost as powerful as the reality. There's a quirky tidbit tucked in here too. Some fashion magazines ran cheeky ads for nerve powders and tonics without naming ingredients, but everyone in the know winked at what was really inside. Imagine flipping through glossy pages filled with gowns, perfumes, and sandwiched in between a delicate ad promising graceful rest in a pretty little vial. You stroll past the grand hotels, their lobbies filled with celebrities and aristocrats. A famous actress sweeps past, draped in furs, her smile dazzling, her step unsteady. Behind her, a journalist whispers that she's had the white touch. You sense how the craze has climbed the social ladder, becoming not just a vice of bohemians and musicians, but a symbol dangerous, chic, irresistible for the glamorous few. But as with every performance in Paris, there's a backstage. For every glittering gown, there's a hollow look behind the mirror. For every actress smiling for photographers, there's the quiet slump in a dressing room chair once the lights go out. Fashion and heroin walk hand in hand, but you can already tell which one is leading the other. You step back onto the boulevard, dazzled by the lights, unsettled by the shadows. The city is dressing up its despair, and the needle is becoming part of the costume. You head down toward the grand buildings where the marble staircases echo with polished shoes and polished speeches. Paris is not only a city of cafes and cabarets, it's also a city of paperwork, rules, and the men who enforce them. And by the early 1920s, the whispers of heroin have grown loud enough to rattle the chambers of police stations and parliamentary halls. But here, the odd part, you don't hear alarm bells ringing. You hear shuffling, muttering, the kind of half-hearted concern that feels more like a yawn than a call to action. The police know, the politicians know, and yet everyone seems content to glance at the problem, then look the other way. You stand outside a police precinct and watch a detective lean against the doorway, cigarette dangling from his lips. He's seen packets of powder change hands in Montmartre bars, he's even confiscated a few. But tonight he shrugs and heads back inside. There are bigger crimes, he insists. Petty theft, political unrest, smuggling. Why chase after a few dreamy-eyed artists? Then you cross into the Hotel de Ville, where the city's politicians argue beneath chandeliers that drip light like molten gold. Some are concerned, yes, they mutter about rising cases of addiction, about whispers of overdoses. But others, too many others, seem more concerned with appearances. To admit heroin is a problem would mean admitting Paris has a crack in its perfect facade, and nobody wants to spoil the illusion of a roaring, glittering, modern city. Historians still argue whether corruption played a role here. Did some officials quietly profit from looking the other way, or was it simply negligence dressed in fine suits? The truth is probably a blend, but the result is the same, half crackdowns that amount to little more than gestures. You catch sight of a police raid one evening, a cafe in Montparnasse, doors slammed open, patrons lined up against the wall. The officers bark commands, seize packets, drag a few unlucky souls into the night. For a moment the city trembles. But the very next evening the cafe is open again, the music louder, the packets passing under tables just as quickly. The raids are like rain showers in summer, dramatic, noisy, but quickly gone, leaving the streets just as hot and restless as before. There's even a quirky tidbit here. One Parisian paper joked that half the city's police officers could be bribed with nothing more than free tickets to the Folies Bergère. Imagine that. Corruption not hidden behind closed doors, but laughed about in the very newspapers meant to hold power accountable. You wander back into the night, realizing that this strange dance between authority and indulgence is part of what allows the craze to spread. Paris doesn't truly want heroin gone, it wants to flirt with danger without ever admitting it. The police raid just enough to claim they're protecting the people, and the politicians make just enough speeches to soothe the moralists. But behind the curtains, the city is still slipping powder into its veins. You glance up at the glowing dome of the Palais Bourbon, where debates drone on into the night. Inside, men in suits are arguing about budgets, reparations, and rebuilding after the war. Heroin barely makes the agenda. You can almost hear the city sigh. As long as the music plays, as long as the lights shine, no one wants to break the spell. And so the deniability continues, this time not just among doctors or dealers, but among the very people meant to lead. The powder drifts quietly through Paris, untouched by laws too weak to catch it and politicians too distracted to care. You pick up a newspaper from a kiosk, its ink still fresh, and the headlines scream louder than the streetcars rattling past. Paris in the 1920s doesn't hide its scandals, it parades them across front pages, making heroin not just a substance but a spectacle. The tabloids love this stuff. They thrive on a good fall-from-grace story, and heroin provides them with endless material. You run your finger down the page and find tales of glittering starlets suddenly collapsing backstage, of poets found unconscious in dingy hotel rooms, of young aristocrats exposed for funding their habits with punbra-cut jewelry. Each story reads like a warning, but you can't help noticing the secret thrill woven between the lines. The press has figured out the formula. Shock sells, but glamour seals the deal. An overdose in a poor neighborhood might merit a paragraph. But when a model from the Champs-Élysées keels over at a private party, that earns 3 columns, an illustration, and a week of chatter in the cafés. Historians still argue whether these stories curbed heroin use or glamorized it further. Did readers clutch their pearls and vow to avoid temptation, or did they secretly lean closer, curious to taste the same forbidden life? Either way, the papers couldn't resist feeding the city's appetite for both horror and allure. You find a quirky tidbit tucked in the feuilleton section. One satirical column claimed a theater troupe was considering staging Hamlet with heroin as the ghost, forever haunting the prince. Ridiculous, yes, but also telling narcotics weren't just a problem, they'd become a cultural joke, a metaphor, a lazy shorthand for decadence. And the rhythm of it all is addictive in its own right. Every time a scandal fades, another takes its place. A singer collapses mid-performance at the Moulin Rouge. A painter vanishes for weeks, then reappears gaunt and trembling, insisting he was on retreat. A politician's nephew is caught with syringes in his luggage at Gare du Nord, sparking whispered conversations in salons and smoky bars. You stand in a café and watch people devour these stories like croissants, flakes of gossip sticking to their lips. Nobody admits to knowing anyone caught in these disasters, and yet everybody seems to know someone who knows someone who does. Heroin becomes less a hidden vice and more a kind of shadow celebrity, famous by association with those it ruins. The paradox gnaws at you. The press condemns addiction while simultaneously ensuring it stays in the spotlight. Like a fire they pretend to fight while secretly fanning the flames, Parisian newspapers help keep the heroin craze alive in the city's imagination. And for a society already obsessed with performance, that imagination is half the thrill. So you fold the paper, slip it back onto the stand, and keep walking. Tomorrow another scandal will appear. The names will change, but the story will be the same. Paris addicted not only to heroin but to reading about it. You wander into a quiet corner of Paris, past the cafes and the clamor, and find yourself in a laboratory. The smell of chemicals hangs heavy in the air, metallic and sharp, mixing with the faint scent of tobacco from a forgotten cigarette. Scientists in white coats murmur over glass beakers and microscopes, jotting notes in precise handwriting. And among the petri dishes and test tubes, there is heroin sitting on a polished shelf, almost innocuous, almost respectable. The labs of the 1920s are paradoxical places. On one hand, the scientific method is everything: careful observation, repetition, measurement. On the other, the same researchers who warn against morphine dependency often praise heroin's miraculous properties. It's considered safe, effective, modern. You imagine a researcher swirling a vial of clear liquid in his hand, peering into the glass as if it could reveal not just chemistry but destiny. Historians still argue whether this blind faith in heroin was simple naivety or a willful oversight. Some scientists genuinely believed it was less addictive than morphine, others turned a careful eye away, ignoring troubling reports to maintain the appearance of progress. Either way, science lends a cloak of legitimacy to the powder drifting through the streets. You notice the small contradictions. One lab manual warns that repeated use may alter the temperament of the patient, while a prominent medical journal hails it as the perfect solution for insomnia and post-war trauma. The words clash on the page like two competing jazz bands, and you can't decide which one to listen to. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some Parisian chemists reportedly experimented with heroin-infused chocolates, arguing it could soothe nerves while satisfying a sweet tooth. Imagine a confection that's both decadent and addictive, offered politely to visitors who never quite know whether they're tasting candy or a carefully measured dose of peril. Back in the city, this scientific ambiguity becomes a kind of permission slip. Pharmacists cite research, doctors reference journals, and patients nod, trusting in the authority of glass, ink, and carefully printed numbers. The powder moves from lab to café seamlessly, as though each syringe or packet carries a seal of legitimacy alongside its powdery contents. You step outside, the lab's sterile smell replaced by the faint aroma of baked bread and wet stone. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the city's rooftops. You feel the tension of two worlds, the rationality of science and the irrational pull of the city. Heroin exists in both, sanctioned by some, ignored by others, and embraced by those who want relief without judgment. As you wander past the Seine, you realize that in a city that worships innovation, curiosity, and modernity, the powder is almost expected to exist. Science may nod, shrug, or even smile, but it rarely interferes. Paris, it seems, can experiment on itself with the blessing of the very institutions meant to protect it. You wander back into the streets, past cafés and laboratories, where the city seems to hum with quiet experimentation. This time you find yourself in rooms that smell of tinctures and oils, where the lines between medicine, superstition, and marketing blur. Here, heroin isn't just for soldiers or bohemians, it's sold as a cure for almost everything: nervousness, asthma, heartbreak, even mild shyness. You notice how casual it is, the same way one might reach for a cup of tea. A small shop tucked in an alleyway offers miracle powders in neatly labeled jars. You peer at the labels, nerves calmed, spirits lifted, rest restored. Patrons nod politely as they receive tiny packets from the pharmacist, none of them fully certain what they are consuming. And why question it? Everyone else is doing the same. Heroin, cloaked in the language of medical science, seems like an almost innocent convenience. Historians still argue whether these fringe uses were purely quackery or a reflection of genuine, desperate needs unmet by conventional medicine. Some patients reported relief, others found themselves slipping too far into dependence. The boundary between helpful and harmful is razor-thin, like walking along a tightrope over the Seine, eyes half blinded by city lights. You watch a young woman lean across the counter, insisting the powder will help her face the stage fright she has before every recital. The pharmacist nods solemnly, measuring out the familiar crystalline powder with the precision of a jeweler cutting a diamond. Later, you hear whispers of men who swore heroin cured their migraines, their insomnia, even mild heartbreak. It's a strange, almost whimsical logic, yet it thrives. And here's a quirky detail. Some doctors reportedly recommended heroin to their patients simply to encourage cheerfulness, considering a bright disposition preferable to the slow misery of depression. You imagine a well-dressed gentleman leaving a clinic, smiling politely, bottle tucked under his arm as if he's been handed a secret talisman. The city thrives on such contradictions. People are told heroin is both medicine and vice, cure and curse, a friend and a trickster. And somehow, Paris seems to embrace it all at once, delighting in ambiguity, testing limits, and questioning nothing too seriously. You continue your stroll, watching shadows stretch across cobblestones, and realize how much the city's curiosity contributes to the craze. Heroin isn't just a drug, it's a cultural experiment, a chemical canvas onto which Parisians project their hopes, anxieties, and desires. And as the sun dips behind the rooftops, the line between necessity and indulgence becomes almost invisible, leaving you unsure whether to marvel or shiver. You descend into the underground of Paris, where the city feels different, closer, heavier, darker. Narrow stairways lead to basements and cellars, spaces where cigarette smoke hangs thick and the clatter of everyday life disappears. Here, the powder doesn't whisper anymore, it is business, commerce, and ritual rolled into one. Dealers, many no older than students themselves, weigh, wrap, and exchange packets with precision. The clientele varies. An artist, a writer, a dancer, all moving in a world where currency and desire intertwine seamlessly. Some parts of this market operate with a shadow of decorum. You watch a young man in a waistcoat exchange a small package with a poet in a nearby corner, nodding politely as if it were a handshake. Another dealer slips a folded note across the table to a cabaret singer, quietly negotiating quantity and price. No alarms, no chaos, just transactions lubricated by discretion, trust, and the hum of expectation. Historians still argue how widespread these underground networks truly were. Some suggest they were tiny and highly localized, others claim they stretched across the entire city, feeding a robust subculture. Either way, the streets above remain oblivious, or willfully so, while the veins of Paris carry a different rhythm, one measured in packets, discreet nods, and whispered reassurances. A quirky detail emerges. Some dealers reportedly offered small loyalty rewards like free drinks or theater tickets to encourage repeat customers, blending commerce with social etiquette. Imagine a powder dealer with a ledger in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. As the underground market thrives, the surface of the city reacts. Parents, journalists, and reformers start raising alarms, and Paris experiences its first real moral panic over heroin. Crowds gather at rallies, speeches are delivered, and pamphlets are printed warning of the city's soft decline. Politicians and police, caught between genuine concern and complicity, respond with half measures, raids, fines, and public declarations that seem more symbolic than effective. You wander among these public outcries, sensing the tension between fascination and fear. In cafes, conversations oscillate between horror stories and secret excitement. Someone recounts a famous actress's collapse with wide eyes and hushed admiration. Another whispers of the white powder's ability to erase nerves, erase pain, even erase the memory of a bad day. The moral panic, it seems, only amplifies the allure. Historians still argue whether these panics reduced heroin use or fed the spectacle. Many reformers genuinely hoped to protect the city's youth, but the act of publicizing the craze arguably made it seem more tantalizing to the curious. Quirky detail? Pamphlets warning parents of heroin often included diagrams showing proper dosage and lists of symptoms to watch for, blending education with a weird kind of instruction manual. It's almost like handing out recipes for mischief while claiming moral superiority. By night, the city buzzes with contradictions. Above ground, reformers shout and protest. Below ground, dealers smile and calculate their margins, and everywhere Parisians flirt with the edge, fascinated and afraid in equal measure. You realize that moral panic isn't just a reaction, it's part of the dance, another thread woven into the fabric of Parisian life, guiding, shaping, and even sustaining the craze. You wander through Paris at dawn when the streets are quiet but the city still hums faintly, like a dream refusing to end. Here, the early glow of sunlight illuminates rooftops and alleyways where laughter and music once spilled freely. But beneath that shimmer, you sense something has shifted. The glamour, the experimentation, the secret thrill, it's starting to crack like porcelain left too long in the sun. Heroin, once a muse, a fashion accessory, a scientific curiosity, is beginning to reveal its shadow. Some artists cannot finish their work. Musicians forget lines, notes drift off-key. The lost generation, once so proud of its rebellion, now wanders hollow-eyed, too tired to argue or create. You notice the subtle tremor in hands, the glazed stare, the casual neglect of daily life. What was once a sparkling indulgence has started dragging its users into dependency. Historians still argue about the scale of this crash. Did Paris as a whole spiral, or was it limited to the artistic and bohemian circles? Evidence suggests the latter, though the ripple effects touched every corner from laboratories to cabarets to grand hotels. The dream of a liberated, chemically enhanced city begins to fray. You pass a once bustling cabaret, now quiet except for a single piano practicing in the corner. A flapper sips coffee, her feathered headband slightly askew, and a small vial rests discreetly on the table. She looks around nervously, aware that what was chic yesterday is now increasingly dangerous. Some of her friends vanish overnight, swallowed by dependency. Others remain, haunted by the memory of the high, trembling at the thought of withdrawal. Quirky tidbit: some cafes kept recovery rooms with faintly uncomfortable chairs and water jugs where regulars could sit out the effects of heroin before attempting to resume social life. It was like a waiting room for lost energy and failing nerves, and yet it became another part of the social ritual rather than a warning. The streets themselves seem to mirror the mood. The lamplight, once magical, now casts shadows that feel longer, colder. The music is still playing somewhere, but it's slower, more tentative, less daring. You feel the tension between the city's carefree surface and the underlying exhaustion beneath. Paris, in its quest for freedom and indulgence, has flirted too closely with the edge. The glamour fades and reality seeps in through the cracks. And yet, in this quiet moment, you can sense the paradox. The same city that embraced excess now must face consequence. Heroin has promised liberation, artistry, sophistication, but it has also left dependence, disillusionment, and a lingering ache in its wake. You step onto the cobblestones, feeling the pull of a city slowly waking to its own shadow. You stroll through the quieter streets now, where the clamor of cabarets and the rush of cafes has softened to an occasional laugh or the faint click of shoes on cobblestones. Paris is still Paris, still shimmering with history, still pulsing with life, but something has changed. The heroin craze that once seemed to infuse every corner of the city is fading, not with a bang but with a quiet, lingering sigh. The artists still work, but with more caution. Some have left, returning to distant countries or abandoning dreams that seemed too fragile for the weight of chemical indulgence. Others remain, scarred but resilient, carrying memories of nights where the world seemed softer, slower, brighter, and simultaneously more hollow than ever. You notice a young poet leaning against a wall, notebook in hand, writing in a hand that trembles slightly, not with inspiration alone, but with the aftershocks of what once carried him effortlessly through sleepless nights. Historians still argue whether the legacy of the 1920s heroin scene is one of cultural enrichment or a cautionary tale of excess. Certainly, it shaped the rhythm of jazz, the edge of bohemian art, and the persona of the lost generation. But it also left shadows, addiction, despair, and a complicated moral footprint that would linger for decades. Quirky tidbit? Some cafes, even years later, displayed faded signs hinting at the old nerve powders or whispered about patrons who had once been legendary in their circles for their indulgence. It became a kind of urban folklore, stories told in half-smiles and knowing glances rather than warnings. The city itself adapts. Where once the powder coursed invisibly through veins and alleys, now it recedes, leaving traces in literature, art, and gossip. Streets remain alive, cafes still glow, and jazz still drifts on evening air. Yet the memory of the craze lingers in the subtle gestures of the city, an old melody, a tucked-away vial, a photograph of a flapper from another era. You pause on a bridge overlooking the Seine, feeling the water move slowly below, reflecting the soft glow of gas lamps and early morning light. The city breathes around you, alive but tempered. Heroin, once the secret pulse of Parisian nights, has quieted. Its shadow remains in stories, sketches, songs, and warnings whispered across generations. The city endured, as cities always do, carrying forward both its beauty and its scars. You walk on, knowing the streets have absorbed the lessons and the lore alike. Paris remains a city of possibility, wonder, and quietly memory. And somewhere in the soft hush of a morning breeze, you sense that the story of the craze has shifted from immediacy to legend, fading like a dream while leaving its mark on the imagination of everyone who lived or simply walked through it. You stroll through modern Paris in your mind. As if the city has stretched a century ahead, the cobblestones smooth underfoot, the cafes still humming with life but quieter, tempered, wiser. The ghosts of the 1920s, the artists, poets, flappers, chemists, and secretive dealers seem to float alongside the tourists snapping photos, the jazz spilling from a tucked-away club, the faint aroma of fresh croissants drifting down narrow streets. You realize that history never really disappears, it layers itself, quietly influencing every alley, every shadow, every note of music. The heroin craze of that decade now exists mostly in stories, art, and literature, but its echoes persist. Modern writers and musicians sometimes channel that reckless energy, knowingly or not, inspired by the same pursuit of escape, intensity, and beauty. You pass a gallery showing sketches of bohemian nights, some of them eerily accurate, others romanticized. Each frame is a window into a time where experimentation was celebrated and consequence often ignored. Historians still argue whether the cultural innovations of that era would have happened without the haze of addiction, or if the cost was too high to justify the brief bursts of brilliance. And as you consider the answer, you feel the subtle tension between curiosity and caution, between indulgence and restraint that Paris, and perhaps the world, has carried ever since. Quirky tidbit: some modern cafes celebrate the legacy with tongue-in-cheek 1920s nights, complete with vintage Dacre, jazz music, and mock tonic powders served in small vials. It's playful nostalgia, a wink to history without the danger, reminding you that every era has its temptations, some tamed, some remembered. You pause on a quiet bridge, the Seine flowing gently beneath, reflecting lamplight that's both old and new. Time has softened the edges of the craze, but the memory lingers, a whisper of what once was and a reminder of the delicate dance between beauty, creativity, and risk. The city breathes softly, carrying the past forward into the present, inviting you to wander, to imagine, and to wonder how the choices of a century ago still ripple through the streets today. You wander through Paris again, though it's less a city and more a living memory. The streets seem quieter now, yet every corner hums with echoes of the past. The distant strains of jazz from a hidden club, the subtle laughter of cafes long gone, the flicker of lamplight on cobblestones that once bore the weight of hurried footsteps and secret exchanges. You realize the heroin craze left more than stories, it left traces in the city's rhythm, a pattern that still influences how Parisians inhabit their spaces, take risks, and flirt with indulgence. The streets and cafes are safer now, but the ghosts linger in culture. Modern musicians sometimes reference the bohemian intensity of the 1920s in their music, and writers draw inspiration from the artists who danced on the line between brilliance and collapse. You notice small plaques in tucked-away museums, subtle exhibitions that hint at the highs, the creativity, and the peril of that era, each one a reminder that experimentation carries consequences. Historians still argue whether the Bohemian experimentation fueled genuine cultural innovation or merely masked suffering behind glamour and intoxication. It's likely both. You can sense it in the architecture, the art, and even in the quiet rituals of modern cafes, curiosity tempered with experience, pleasure tempered with caution. Quirky tidbit: some modern Parisian cafes now host speakeasy nights where patrons can experience the jazz and ambience of the 1920s, but instead of powder, they sip herbal teas or mock nerve tonics, a playful homage to history that keeps the spirit alive without the danger. You stand on a bridge overlooking the Seine, feeling the city breathe beneath the soft hum of life. The past is layered in every reflection on the water, every shadow along the quay. Heroin may no longer define the streets, but the era's lessons about creativity, risk, indulgence, and the delicate line between brilliance and self-destruction continue to ripple. Paris carries its past gently, inviting you to observe, learn, and imagine how history shapes the present in ways both subtle and profound. You move slowly through Paris in the soft glow of evening, letting the familiar hum of the city seep into your awareness. The streets are quieter now, but every corner carries whispers of the past, like the distant echo of a piano in a shadowed cafe or the faint laughter of flappers long gone. You can almost feel the pulse of history vibrating beneath the cobblestones, a rhythm that carries the lessons of indulgence, creativity, and consequence forward into the present. The cafes and galleries that once harbored secret packets now hold conversations about memory, legacy, and art. Patrons sip coffee and tea while reading novels that immortalize the lost generation, while jazz softly plays from a hidden speaker. You realize the city itself has become a teacher, a living archive of ambition, pleasure, and cautionary tales. Even the lamplights seem to flicker with stories, casting shadows that are part warning, part celebration. Historians still argue whether the aura of the 1920s Parisian heroin scene ultimately enriched the city's culture or simply left scars masked by nostalgia. Perhaps it did both, as every act of risk carries its duality, innovation alongside peril, inspiration alongside consequence. You feel the delicate tension between admiration for daring lives and sorrow for their losses, woven into the very fabric of Paris. Quirky tidbit: some modern tour advertise 1920s Paris walks, where guides point out cafes, theaters, and studios once frequented by heroin-using artists. But instead of powder, the tour gives participants a small vintage chocolate or a herbal infusion, playfully connecting the past to the present. It's a wink from history, reminding you that curiosity can exist safely if tempered with care. You pause on a bridge above the Seine, watching the water ripple gently under the glow of lamplights. You sense the city breathing, carrying its history like a soft hum beneath every step. The streets have transformed, the powder has vanished, but the echoes remain as vivid and instructive as ever. In Paris, the past never truly sleeps. It merely shifts into whispers, inviting anyone who wanders to notice, reflect, and imagine the delicate dance between indulgence, art, and consequence. You wander once more through the streets of Paris, imagining the city's heartbeat as a continuous thread linking past and present. The cafes still hum softly, the jazz still drifts from tucked-away corners, and the artwork lining gallery walls carries whispers of the 1920s, the nights of experimentation, indulgence, and fleeting brilliance. You realize the heroin craze, though long gone, has left a subtle but persistent mark on creativity itself, a reminder of the risks and rewards of pushing boundaries. Artists today sometimes draw inspiration from the era, painting, writing, or composing with a faint echo of that intensity that once coursed through smoky rooms and shadowed salons. The lost generation's rebellion, their pursuit of feeling and freedom, has become part of Paris's creative DNA. You feel the energy as you imagine someone sketching by the Seine, listening to a modern jazz trio, unaware that their focus is shaped by echoes of the past. Historians still argue whether the creativity fueled by indulgence was worth the human cost. Some claim it produced genius, others insist it left devastation in its wake. Perhaps it is both, a dual legacy woven into the city's soul. You notice the tension between admiration for their daring and awareness of the consequences, a dance that continues to ripple through modern life. Quirky tidbit: certain Parisian jazz clubs celebrate the era with 1920s nights, where patrons dress in flapper attire and sip carefully crafted cocktails named after famous Lost Generation writers. It's playful nostalgia, a safe homage to a time when risk and glamour collided. You pause on a quiet quay along the Seine, watching the reflections of lamplights ripple across the water. You sense the city breathing softly beneath the layers of history, carrying the echoes of indulgence, artistry, and caution. The powder has vanished, the crises faded, yet Paris whispers lessons to anyone who wanders through it, inviting reflection, imagination, and a delicate respect for the line between inspiration and excess. You walk slowly through Paris at twilight, when the city exhales and the shadows lengthen over the Seine. The streets are calm, yet every corner seems alive with echoes of the past. The whispered stories of cafes, the faint strains of music from hidden corners, the faint scent of pastries carried on the evening air. You realize the heroin craze of the 1920s, once a vibrant, dangerous current, has transformed into memory, shaping culture and leaving lessons layered into the city itself. The artists, writers, and dreamers who once flirted with danger have long gone, but their influence lingers. Modern creativity carries traces of their daring, their search for intensity, and their willingness to push limits. You notice how galleries display their sketches, how music still captures the emotional highs and lows they sought, and how even the quietest cafes retain an aura of whispered experimentation. Historians still debate whether the era's indulgence was a catalyst for art or merely a costly distraction, a fragile line between brilliance and collapse. And perhaps as you observe the city's quiet streets, you understand that the answer is both. Paris has a way of absorbing extremes, keeping memories alive without allowing them to dominate, letting both beauty and caution coexist. Quirky tidbit: some modern Parisian writers celebrate heroin nights. Sipping herbal teas while reading poems of the lost generation, a playful acknowledgement of history that honors creativity without endorsing danger. It's a wink from the past, a gentle reminder that fascination can survive safely when tempered by awareness. You pause on a bridge, feeling the Seine move quietly beneath you, reflecting lamplight that flickers like memory itself. The city breathes, carrying the duality of indulgence and resilience. The powder has faded from its streets, the crises have passed, yet Paris teaches that the echoes of history remain, as cautionary whispers, as inspiration, and as a gentle pulse in every corner. You inhale deeply, letting the calm settle around you, feeling the rhythm of a city that endures, quietly guiding those who wander through it. You drift further into the city, though by now Paris feels less like a place you walk through and more like a dream that wraps itself around you. The cobblestones soften beneath your steps, the lamplights blur into glowing halos, and the air carries only the faintest trace of centuries stacked on centuries. You realize that the heroin craze of the 1920s has become just one layer in a mosaic of stories, absorbed into the city's long history of reinvention, indulgence, and resilience. The cafes are timeless, new furniture, new faces, yet the same unhurried rhythm. People sip espresso, sketch in notebooks, whisper about ideas, and unknowingly echo the bohemian spirit that thrived a century ago. The difference now is awareness. The mistakes of the past are studied, whispered about, and transformed into stories rather than repeated blindly. Paris has learned to carry its shadows without stumbling in them. Historians still argue whether those years of indulgence truly shaped modern creativity or if art would have flourished without such extremes. Their debates fade into the background as you walk, reminding you that certainty is rare and history is often a mirror reflecting more questions than answers. Quirky tidbit: in certain bookstores you can find lost generation corners, little curated shelves stocked with Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Stein, and others, sometimes displayed with vintage photographs and mock medicine bottles labeled tonics. It's part satire, part tribute, an acknowledgement that fascination with the era still lingers but has been safely distilled into art and humor. You pause again by the Seine, but now the river feels like a dream current, carrying not only the echoes of the 1920s but the countless other eras before and after. You breathe deeply, the city softening around you, and you realize Paris will always hold its lessons gently, woven into its streets, hidden in its shadows, and whispered through its endless nights. You move gently through the city once more, but now it feels as if Paris itself is guiding your steps, nudging you toward quiet streets, inviting you to listen to whispers that drift between lamplight and shadow. The heroin craze of the 1920s has dissolved into memory, yet you notice how seamlessly those echoes blend with other eras, revolutionary cries, royal parades, and countless forgotten conversations. Paris carries all of them with the same grace, never rushing, never discarding, simply weaving each into its living fabric. The cafes continue their quiet rituals, the clink of cups and murmur of voices unchanged by time. You imagine writers bent over notebooks, their pens scratching with urgency, unaware that a century from now, their passions will be softened into footnotes and bedtime stories. You realize the heroin haze was only one chapter in the city's longer tale of indulgence, artistry, and resilience. Historians still argue whether indulgence in the 1920s Paris scene was a tragic detour or an inevitable part of modernity's growing pains. As you walk, you sense the futility of certainty. Paris itself seems to shrug at the question, offering beauty instead of conclusions. Quirky tidbit: certain walking tour of Montmartre hand guests little vials of lavender or rosemary as keepsakes, a gentle nod to the powdered past without invoking danger. It's playful, fragrant, and strangely comforting, proof that memory can be reshaped into something soft, safe, and even sweet. You pause at the river's edge where the Seine glows under scattered lamplights, its surface rippling like a tapestry of centuries. You feel the weight of the past soften into a lull, as if Paris is whispering directly to you. The stories remain, the lessons endure, but for now all you need is rest. You wander again through Paris, though by now the city feels more like a companion than a destination. The streets do not hurry you, the cafes do not rush you, and the soft glow of lamplight seems to lean in, as if eager to share one more story. The heroin craze of the 1920s becomes only a thread in the city's greater tapestry, and you sense how gently Paris holds all of its histories, never letting any one moment define it entirely. The cafes, timeless as ever, hum with quiet conversation. A young couple debates philosophy, a student sketches absent-mindedly, a traveler scribbles notes in a worn journal. None of them think about the shadows of the past, yet all of them unconsciously repeat the rhythms of those who came before. You realize that history is not a distant relic. It is alive in gestures, habits, and echoes that ripple forward. Historians still argue whether the heroin-soaked bohemia of the 1920s was the spark that ignited cultural brilliance or merely the haze that obscured deeper truths. The city seems unbothered by their debates, content to let both possibilities coexist, as Paris always has, with contradictions folded neatly into its soul. Quirky tidbit: some small antique shops in Saint-Germain display vintage medicine bottles alongside postcards of Jazz-age Paris, selling them not as relics of danger but as curiosities of history. A bottle that once suggested escape now sits harmlessly on a shelf, transformed into a gentle reminder of how time softens everything. You pause under a lamppost, its light pooling softly at your feet, and feel the hum of the city cradle you. The Seine moves quietly, carrying centuries of memory in its current. The heroin craze is only one of many whispers folded into a lullaby of streets, shadows, and stories. Paris, in its endless patience, becomes a gentle archive, reminding you that the past can rest, and so can you. You step once more into the quiet streets, though by now Paris feels less like a city you move through and more like a lullaby unfolding around you. The cobblestones carry you gently forward. The lamplights glow like watchful stars, and the faint hum of the Seine drifts in the background like a steady heartbeat. The heroin craze of the 1920s is now little more than a softened echo, a faded stanza in the endless song Paris sings to anyone willing to listen. In the cafes, you hear the familiar chorus, cups clinking, chairs shifting, quiet voices murmuring about love, about art, about tomorrow. The people here do not speak of powders or shadows, yet they repeat the same rhythms of curiosity and connection that shaped the city long ago. You realize that the past never vanishes, it simply reshapes itself into gentler patterns, humming through the ordinary rituals of daily life. Historians still argue whether those reckless years were a necessary step toward modern cultural freedom or a painful detour best left in the archives. Paris seems unconcerned with their debates. The city prefers to remind you that every era carries both brilliance and consequence, folded together like layers of a croissant, indivisible, inseparable, quietly delicious in their complexity. Quirky tidbit: some boutique hotels in Montparnasse host lost generation evenings, with candlelit jazz, vintage decor, and storytelling circles. Guests listen to old poems while sipping chamomile tea in place of cocktails. It is playful, safe nostalgia, designed less to recreate indulgence than to soothe curiosity. You pause at the edge of the river where the Seine glimmers under soft light, flowing like a lullaby that never ends. You sense the city breathing, inviting you to release the last traces of tension. The echoes of indulgence fade into calm, and Paris itself becomes a cradle of rest, its history rocking you gently towards sleep. You wander once more through Paris, though at this point it feels more like floating than walking. The streets no longer ask anything of you, they simply carry you like a quiet current guiding you deeper into rest. The heroin craze of the 1920s has nearly dissolved now, softened into whispers, folded into the larger silence of history. What once felt urgent and chaotic is only a faint memory, as harmless as dust sparkling in lamplight. The cafes, still alive with the gentle murmur of voices, seem like echoes of centuries rather than single moments. A poet scratches a line into a notebook, a painter studies shadows on a wall, a traveler lets their coffee cool as they dream. They do not know they are repeating patterns from long ago, yet the city hums through them, reminding you that creativity never truly fades, it only changes its disguise. Historians still argue whether the reckless indulgence of that era unlocked something essential in human expression or merely highlighted our weakness for escape. The debate drifts like smoke, unresolved, and Paris simply lets it be, as if to say, the answer matters less than the story itself. Quirky tidbit: some modern jazz bars sell mock menus of 1920s vices, printed cards listing powders and potions, though the only thing served is sparkling water with lemon. Patrons laugh softly as they sip, enjoying the safe parody of what once carried real danger. The city has turned shadow into play, memory into gentleness. You pause by the Seine one last time tonight. The water glides under bridges like an endless lullaby, carrying centuries with it, each ripple erasing sharp edges and softening the past into silence. Paris breathes around you and you feel its quiet invitation. Let go of tension, let the echoes fade, let the night hold you steady. You find yourself once more by the Seine, though now it feels less like a river and more like a memory itself, moving endlessly, reflecting lamplight, carrying whispers from centuries past. The heroin craze of the 1920s drifts somewhere in those currents, reduced to ripples no sharper than the soft rings formed when a pebble touches water. Paris allows history to dissolve gently, never erased, never harsh, just folded into the stream of time. The cafes along the banks glow warmly, like lanterns against the night. Inside, conversations rise and fall with the same rhythm they always have. You imagine how 100 years ago voices carried similar cadences, restless artists, questioning philosophers, daring dreamers, yet now the urgency has faded into something quieter. You realize that history often repeats, but it repeats softly, transforming reckless experiments into gentle traditions. Historians still argue whether that strange decade was a true turning point or only a glamorous distraction. As you watch the reflections drift across the Seine, you sense that Paris doesn't mind the uncertainty. The city thrives in ambiguity, carrying contradictions with grace as if balance itself were an art form. Quirky tidbit: at certain riverbank bookstalls you can find reproductions of 1920s advertisements for nerve tonics and miracle powders, sold today as postcards. They are curiosities now, playful relics of a time when indulgence masqueraded as cure. The sellers smile knowingly, turning what was once dangerous into harmless souvenirs. You linger at the railing, watching the water shimmer under the lamps. The hum of the city quiets, the air grows still, and even your thoughts slow down to match the river's steady pace. You feel the lesson settle gently. Indulgence fades, crises dissolve, but memory flows on, soft, patient, endlessly carrying the past forward in whispers. You drift deeper into Paris, though now the city feels less like streets and more like breath itself, slow, steady, carrying you with each inhale and exhale. The heroin craze of the 1920s has softened to the point of being no more than a sigh in the city's long story. What once roared with energy now lingers as a faint pulse, tucked beneath layers of revolutions, romances, and quiet reinventions. You pass a row of cafes, their windows glowing amber against the dark. Inside, the rhythm is familiar, The shuffle of chairs, the swirl of steam above cups, the comfortable murmur of people sharing ideas. It is the same music Paris has always played, though the reckless undertones of a century ago have been smoothed away into gentleness. You realize that indulgence fades, but curiosity endures, reshaping itself into safer forms. Historians still argue whether the heroin haze gave birth to artistic breakthroughs or merely blurred vision. The debate drifts endlessly like smoke above a candle, and Paris lets it drift, unbothered. The city understands what people forget, that contradictions are not flaws but part of the rhythm. Quirky tidbit: in some small Montmartre cabarets, performers tell stories of the wild 20s between songs, their voices playful, their words exaggerated. Guests laugh softly, fully aware it is theater. The past has been staged into something harmless, a gentle parody instead of a haunting. You pause at the edge of a narrow alley, where lamplight spills onto cobblestones like liquid gold. The silence deepens, the hum of the city slows, and even your own thoughts stretch out into calm shapes. The heroin craze becomes only one whisper among thousands, folded into the breathing of Paris itself. The city exhales around you, carrying you toward stillness, carrying you toward rest. You move once more through Paris, though by now the streets feel like corridors of memory rather than places on a map. The heroin craze of the 1920s has faded almost entirely, dissolving into the background hum of the city, its sharp edges worn smooth by time. What once seemed urgent and dangerous now lingers only as a faint shadow, softened by nostalgia, carried quietly like the last note of a song that refuses to vanish. The cafes glow as they always do, pools of warmth against the night. Inside, laughter bubbles, chairs scrape, pens scribble across pages. You notice how ordinary these rhythms are, yet how extraordinary they feel when you remember they echo centuries of repetition. The heroin years were only one variation, a dissonant chord in a melody that has otherwise remained steady. You realize that Paris itself teaches patience. Every storm becomes background music if you wait long enough. Historians still argue whether indulgence shaped the culture or merely mirrored its restlessness. Their debates swirl like dust in sunlight, visible yet insubstantial. The city seems unconcerned, content to let uncertainty coexist with beauty. Quirky tidbit: in a few hidden galleries, artists now create perfume inspired by the lost generation, blending lavender, smoke, and coffee into bottles labeled with 1920s slang. Visitors smile, spritz the air, and carry away only fragrance, not danger. It is history transformed into scent, safe and fleeting. You pause by the Seine, its waters reflecting lamplight in trembling ribbons. The air is still, the hum of the city softened to a hush. The heroin craze has disappeared into the long lull of time, leaving behind only whispers, gentle, muted, unthreatening. Paris breathes steadily, shadows dissolving into silence as if to remind you that every story eventually finds its rest.